to have the splendid and brilliant pianist Vedrana Subotic joining us from the University of Utah. She is a fabulous pianist and pedagogue. We first met at the Interharmony International Music Festival a few summers back when we could actually have music festivals in Europe and travel to them, and hopefully we will get to do that again soon. And was very taken by her playing and her teaching, and we struck up a friendship, and she had me over to the University of Utah last year and to play a recital and give a master class, and I really had a fabulous time there. And I'm really honored that she could join us today to work with Karen and Sabina. So Professor Subotic has an amazing and deeply varied international career. You can read all about it via many references on the web. But one thing I wanted to, in particular, note that in 2014, she began an incredible, unparalleled project to perform not only all of Beethoven's solo piano sonatas, but all the duo sonatas and all the piano trios as well. So all 60 works. So she is a deep Beethoven expert, which is why today it's fantastic that both of you are playing Beethoven, obviously in preparation for our own Beethoven festival at 5 p.m. today. So without further ado, we're going to begin with Karen, who is going to perform Beethoven's famous Tempest Sonata, as we call it. The official title is Sonata in D minor, Opus 31, number 2. And we'll start with the first movement. Vedrana, we can go as long as 3 p.m. today. That would be the cutoff. So we could see, maybe we could end up doing more than one movement, once we reach 2 o'clock or before 2 o'clock. We'll see where we're at, but just whatever feels right and organic in terms of addressing and working with Karen. It doesn't obviously have to be the whole piece. It could just be the first movement or 2 movements. So, okay, welcome, Karen. And without further ado, Karen, please give us the first movement of the famous Tempest Sonata. All right. Brava, Karen. Wonderful.
That was beautiful. That was terrific and really very impressive playing. I cannot imagine. I used to practice in an upright when I was a young pianist, and I can relate how difficult it is to exact all the details and get the kind of sound, that we really want from an instrument for which the music is not originally designed for. So bravo to you. And I thought you um, played with incredible discipline, which I really, really appreciate and credit your wonderful teacher for helping you with that. That's one of the things that is often lacking in this particular piece. Because it's perceived as being very free and sort of almost fantasy-like because it's so dramatic, and often it is performed with a certain sort of leisure towards consistency and discipline of rhythm. So bravo to you, and I thought it was a very successful and very beautiful performance. You also got an amazing variety of tonal color as well in those recitatives, and wonderful control of the opening motif as well. Um, before we kind of focus on the movement, just to give you a little bit of context, this sonata is the second of the three in Opus 31 and largely considered to be part of Beethoven's middle period. It is during the time where he was experiencing increasing difficulty with his hearing. He was becoming more and more deaf during this time. And I find that as I've traversed his, complete sonatas in chamber music, that this is about the time when he starts to explore the more philosophical aspects of piano music and his compositional style. And this is evident in these three sonatas, which still share a lot with his early uh, opus, in a sense that there are three of them in the set. And Beethoven was, besides being a wonderful composer, a consummate businessman. He was concerned with his reputation always. He cared deeply about his reputation as a pianist and as a composer, um, and respect of his peers and of the community, and his thoughts about his legacy were always there with him. So these three sonatas together present a very astute um, collection of different moods and different styles. For example, the first one, the G major, which is also a very big sonata, all three are big sonatas in this set, is all about humor and elegance and beauty, and has some Baroque retrospectives in the middle movement, which is a very complex aria. And then we have the D minor sonata, which is deeply dramatic, um, and very personal, very brooding. The key of D minor is actually kind of unusual for Beethoven. If you think about what else appears in the key of D minor, there aren't that many works. I mean, there's certainly lots in D major, but D minor, if you think of the middle movement of Opus 10, number 3, so, very, very deeply felt, brooding music. And then we have the third one, which is in the key of E flat major, um, which is kind of like an Italian, almost an Italian opera buffa in the last movement, very jolly and very good-natured and fun. So, the first one is elegant and witty. The second one is deeply dramatic and personal and brooding. And the third one is kind of good fun and comedy as far as vivacity and sort of Mozartian joy. It represents so many different facets of Beethoven's personality and ability. So I think it's important to know that about the set. So to understand that this middle sonata is sort of the darker cousin to the other two. So having said that, have you played the other two, or are you familiar with the other two? Have you heard them before?
I can't recall. No, sadly, no.
But maybe now you can just kind of hear a little bit of each and kind of see that sandwich in which this D minor sonata exists. So the reason why it's nicknamed Tempest is because Beethoven used little notepads to communicate with people at this point and to jot down his thoughts, called conversation books. They're often referred to in scholarship surrounding Beethoven's life as conversation books. And apparently he jotted down a couple of lines from Shakespeare's Tempest on the same piece of paper as he wrote down some notes from this sonata. And so that together became sort of like a guide for people to think of this sonata as having something to do with the actual Shakespeare play. So it's an interesting thought. I certainly would buy into anything that tells me the composer's frame of mind at the time when he or she are composing particular piece. So now, I loved how you started this. It wasn't complex and fussy. Sometimes it can sound complex and fussy. And I thought that you had a wonderful sort of straightforward confidence about how you started. I was also admiring how well you rolled these, without losing the voicing. Now, I do have a question for you. Do you know where this comes from? Where is that, or rather, what comes out of that? Where do we hear that again the next time?
Well, it's repeated all throughout this first movement, and in the
Right.
second.
So, right. And this comes from. Right. That's kind of the theme. So it's typical for Beethoven. He lays out his ideas immediately. This is what we have. The first three notes. It's the core of the entire movement. So when you play the opening, I'm wondering if you could give a little bit more emphasis to the top note of the arpeggio, so that we really hear that it's that first theme. Bum, 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 bum. There's a certain element of fatefulness in that motif. I'm sure the knock, 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 fate knocking on the door and all that. So there's a certain sort of announcement to those three notes. It's something important is coming. Something is going to happen. And of course, hard to do over Zoom. And, this is crazy how we're doing music right now, but just trying to kind of communicate that intensity of this announcement. Something is about to happen, right? It builds suspense, right away. Can we try that? Good. Just for a moment, take away the rolled chords and just do this for me. Good. Okay. Now imagine that this comes with words to it, like anything that communicates that is an introduction or announcement, like so and so is arriving any minute. So Michael, your friend Michael, is on his way. Or, you know, in this case, if it's Shakespeare, we can say Prospero is on his way. So sort of give us that when you play it. Can you do it one more time?
Should I say it too? No?
Pardon?
Should I say it out loud?
No, but think it. Just think as you play. Yeah, I can hear the difference in it, even over Zoom. It's possible to tell a difference when a musician is thinking content. When you have content in your head, it comes through in the sound and in the phrasing. And not to say that people don't have content when they're playing, but it can be kind of unfocused, or it can be sort of more sensory than necessarily self-aware. So self-awareness, when you're presenting phrasing and music, can go a really long way in communicating to your audience your intent and your meaning. Am I making sense there?
Yeah.
Okay, so could we start one more time, and then we'll go on. Just present that opening arpeggio with the top note, the A, being the first note of the first theme, and then announce, and then proceed. It's good. The E didn't quite sound to me like he was going to the A. I'm sorry to be picky, and especially over Zoom. I'm sure it's terribly frustrating, but just really try to climb to that A. Listen, plan it out. Yeah, exactly. Please keep going. Great. And you know, that left end, bum, 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 I think it will sound more gripping if you do it a little bit shorter, and if you focus on the bottom fingers, right, which are actually the fingers that outline the line that is moving, the C sharp, right? So just kind of grabbing those with more articulation will build more suspense in that opening. Also, when you're playing the opening notes, the C sharp, E, and A, I am not, you know, I'm not suggesting big choreography or theatrics here, but I do think that there's a certain amount of theatricism in this opening that maybe just a little more motion. I don't know if you can see my hand. Just a little more motion on those notes, a little bit more deliberate stroke, if you will. Could we do one more time? I'm sorry I'm spending so much time on the opening, but it's so important to get this to be incredibly gripping and compelling at the very beginning. Your hand a little from above. Could you just put them down a little bit more? Keep going. Okay, and then one more thing about that beginning. If you could start a little softer. Sorry. I'm sitting at a weird angle at the keyboard, so it's not as clear. But if you start just a little bit softer so you can build it up to those arrivals. Could you start right here? do you feel about that?
I'm only thinking about the last note that I played right now, but I like it.
That's okay. All of this will kind of sink in after we've talked and finished talking. You'll probably have like the earworm of this masterclass in your head all day. Let's go on. So the next arpeggio is similar to the first one.
Thank you, Karen.
Hey, okay. Well, that was pretty awesome. You were like, in performance mode. I just wanted to talk a little bit about the sforzandi here. Could you plan those 3 B flat sforzandi so that each one is a little bit more significant? It repeats 3 times. Now, there's an interesting thing about this movement. Things come in threes throughout. It's like the holy trinity of Beethoven in this sonata. He repeats things 3 times to give you structure, and so it's almost a mathematical unity about this sonata. So these. So if you can really lock into that repetition of the 3 B flats, it builds enormous suspense. And then I would do a little bit of time right before, right here. Set that up just a little bit more dramatically. I think that's acceptable in this particular case. So I want to feel the arrival of that D minor the first time that we really hear that tonic. I think it needs to be a bigger deal, but just a little bit of time. Like, think of it as a like just a little gasp for air right there, right before you play the D minor chord. You can start maybe from here. That may be better. Yeah? If you were a conductor, how would you conduct that? This. How would you do that? Would you go da 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 bum, or would you go ti da da dum ti bum be? What do you think? What?
I would do the latter, the second one.
Yeah. So you just have to feel it, and sometimes singing or conducting yourself through the phrase really helps set up the timing. It's about the timing, and we pianists are. You just press the key on the piano and it works, right? You don't have to vibrate, you don't have to retake the bow, you don't have to take a breath, we don't have to do anything other than just push our fingers down, really. So we have to integrate and absorb physical motion as part of expression. So try just giving yourself a 3-4-1, 3-4-1. Can you do it with me? Just with your hands? 3-4-1. Yeah, so like really feel that dun dun cha dum bum be. And now when you play it again, think that gesture. Ti ti cha yum bum be. Can we try from the same place? Yeah. Does it feel a little bit more comfortable there? Yeah, it was, I could hear it this time. Yeah, you took a little bit of time, and as you experiment with that, and I'm sure your teacher can help you set that up. So sometimes it helps to have somebody right next to you going, conducting you into a position there. Okay, so this was really good, and I appreciate that you're doing this instead of going over. Sometimes you see people going over with the left hand, and that's not what Beethoven intended or wrote, really. So I appreciate that you did it correctly there. Now, and your triplets are excellent from the sound quality perspective and the ability to hear the clarity. Really well done. This, comes from. So the first time we have. But this time you have. So the G sharp is, it expresses some form of agony right there, but what is really expressive is this B flat. And I would love to hear that modulated a little bit more, more softly to kind of almost lower the pitch on that B flat. We can't really lower the pitch, but if you plan your contact with the key so that it's not as fast, meaning you play it a little bit slower, it almost sounds like you've flattened the tone a little bit. It's an interesting thing. You can almost intone by inflecting. Can you try that for me? Just start right here. Good, very good. Could you make a difference between the G sharp, the lower half step, and the upper half step? So just a little more. So it's not the same. Because of the triplets, accompaniment can sound a little bit mechanical on occasion. So it's nice to just have a little bit more emphasis on the G sharp so you can ease into the B flat. I won't interrupt you this time. I'd like to get to here. So let's go to there, okay? Start one more time. I have the score here. I don't know why I'm playing from memory when I could just tell you exactly. So when you're going from here, it's again the 3 times that he does it, right? So if we can plan those 3 times as if there is going to be the 4th time, but there isn't. He just goes here. Right? There isn't a 4th one. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah. Like end the phrase and then.
Yeah, so maybe start maybe on the F major one here. This is again the moment where you want to conduct it. Like imagine you're pointing to the trumpets, right? So the orchestra is going ti yum dum tum, right? Like the 3rd one is going to be the one that we're going to, right? It's the most significant one, just like the 3 B flats that I was talking about in the beginning, right? We're going to the 3rd one, and then we take a little bit of time afterwards. And it really sets up this here. Right, it makes it so much more exciting when you build those 3 trumpet calls right there on that A. I think it launches this section into something that is a different character than if you just look at the piano that he wrote there and you think of it as letting some of the tension go. That's not what it is. He actually builds the tension. Sometimes Beethoven is at his most intense when it's really, really quiet. Like think about this, right? It's all piano and kind of, you know, or like it's quiet, and then there's an outburst at the end. So these pianos that Beethoven writes are, you know, often his most intense moments, which are prepared by something that comes right before. And this is one of those cases where you have those 3 calls, and then the real battle begins, so to speak. All of this was a buildup, or the real agitation over, or you know, conflict is set up that way. Is that making sense from the musical perspective? Now, just a small housekeeping note here, and again, difficult to tell from Zoom, but where you begin this, you remember it goes up, note by scale. It's hard to keep track of them because everything is forte at that point, but just think about building that line, just, you know, one note at a time, just step by step, it goes further and further. In Beethoven, I find that a lot of the times it's not about dynamics, it's about character. I mean, sure, it's about dynamics as well. We want to respect the score and play what is in the score. But when you have a situation like this where there is no indication of a crescendo, decrescendo, fortissimo, forte, I mean, look at the score, right? It starts forte, and he just keeps marking fortes and sforzandi after the first 2 phrases. So where do you go with that, right? How do you build that? It's about giving an impression of a crescendo. So if you think, again, it's about the content. If you think a crescendo, it sounds like one, even if you're not necessarily creating one acoustically or physically. Kind of like when he writes in Opus 81A, which is a much later opus, at the end of the first movement, Les Adieux, a sonata which he actually titled. There's a crescendo on an E flat, and you're just kind of going, wait, how do I make a crescendo on a chord that I'm holding, right? I mean, surely Beethoven wasn't crazy when he wrote a crescendo on a single note. So the solution really right there is to think a crescendo, even if you're not doing one, so that when you play the next chord, it sounds like it's a consequence of a crescendo. So just an example to explain, to put this in context. So you don't have dynamic direction here. Everything is loud, but you can think a crescendo, and therefore you can deliver that fortissimo that we just discussed, the 3 A's, with a much greater sense of drama and conviction and confidence. And I think it also saves us from just having this endless set of sforzandi, which at worst can sound harsh, if not just repetitive. You know, repetitive and harsh is the danger of that particular passage. So to avoid that, I think it's really important to have that trajectory of thinking a crescendo, even if you can't really actually make any more sound than you already are. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay, let's not go back though, let's go forward. So from here. Sorry to interrupt. It's a very tightly structured sonata. He changes materials constantly. So this was like one section, and it's by itself. And again, we have three statements here. This one, then another 3. So we have 3 times 3 statements. And if you could organize those dynamically so that they're not all the same, so within themselves, they need to build, and then within the three sequences of three, they need to achieve some kind of terracing of dynamics or expression. The other thing that is important is the F in the left hand. It's the note that fills in the gap, the breathlessness of the right hand. That's the punctuation of the breath in the right hand. Right, it's a conflict between that little moment and what the right hand is saying. Does that make sense? Otherwise, it sounds like the right hand is just repeating the same thing over and over again without having a point. The point is kind of in the left hand, as well as in the buildup of 3 plus 3 plus 3. Could we try that one more time right here? Good. Can you, it was more audible, but I still need a little more. Don't be shy about putting more, making more sound on the F. Could we try that one more time? And then we'll go. Yes, exactly. Okay, and then guess what? He does this 3 times too. This B flat. And then that's the third one, and then things change. You see what I'm saying about the threes? How things come in threes? Yeah. So it helps us organize the material musically and with purpose and arrival points. It also makes us more aware of how Beethoven changes after that third statement. He goes somewhere else. So it's like it's an arrival of sorts after which the music or the character suddenly becomes something different. So it really contributes to the drama and the flow of the piece if you can lock into those threes and understand them contextually in this way. So could we start from here? And do you hear this? 2. Right. So still, when you're playing, just be sure that you leave something for the third iteration of whatever it is. And granted, it's difficult in measure 50, 59, when he goes from these, he only gives you kind of a skinny version of what just happened. Right? So here is the part where you can't do it with the sound, right? You can't play that fortissimo because it's going to sound awful, but you can infuse it with character. A little bit of a Gojix goes a long way, like maybe just a little bit of time before that final B flat. And same thing on these. Right? To make us aware that that's the third time. Can we try one more time from? Karen? So great. Okay, I think that you understand what I mean, but the question is, how do you do it, right? So we have to make a decision. How do we produce what we understand to be the case? So let's try it this way. You tell me, or us, whoever is listening to this, what are you going to do? What are you going to change to allow these three B flats for the third one to sound different than the first two? Can you think of a way? And then say it out loud so that your mind kind of commits to it.
Becoming more agitated, like with each one, and like every time I'm thinking I'm about to like reach it, but I don't. And I go back down, and then I go back up, and I think again I'm gonna reach it, and then finally
Yeah, I think that explains it well in terms of how you've internalized it, but we have to externalize it. So in other words, we have to perform it differently with either different, it's actually kind of simple, either different volume or different timing. Good, right. So you chose volume. I heard that, okay? So that's option number one. The second option is agogic. So you take a little bit of time on the third note. Let's try that one, can we? Do you see what I mean? But before you start, tell me where you're going to take time so we're not trying something that we're not clear about. Where exactly are you going to take time? Where? Before A? Before A or before B flat?
before B flat.
Okay, let's try it. Let's hear it. See, I was thinking about it as you were saying it. I think you actually have to take a little bit of time before A because it goes by so quickly. And those two, that A, B flat is so codependent that if you don't take time on A, you won't be able to take time on B flat. I think you need to do both. I could hear that now. I think that's going to take a little bit of experimentation and achieving a comfort level. But I'd say that was more successful and definitely audible on this weird online format. This would all be so much easier if we could just sit together and do it together. And I'm sorry we can't, but hopefully sometime in the future it will be possible soon. Does that make sense though? What I'm saying with agogics and sound?
I actually don't know what agogics is, but I assume.
Oh, well, I'm so glad. I'm so glad that you said that because sometimes, yeah, I can totally relate to that. Sometimes, someone will use a word. English is not my first language either. And so, sometimes someone will use a word and I'll be like, wait, I really need to look that up. So agogics, it just means to manipulate the timing of the motif. So when we say we can be expressive agogically, that means, for example, I can either do an accent or I can do time. Does it make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I'm so glad you said that. So now you know what I mean, right? You just take a little bit of, you make emphasis with taking a little bit of time rather than by making it louder. That was my whole point about the conversation, the part of the conversation earlier, how it's not always possible to increase the volume on the piano anymore, but you have to do it somehow differently. So we make a greater emphasis when we reach the pinnacle of fortissimo and we can go no more. We take a little bit of time to give it even greater emphasis because we can no longer play more loudly than we already are for whatever reasons, aesthetic, or the instrument doesn't have the capacity or the register doesn't. So sometimes we compensate by acting with time rather than with volume. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Okay, cool. All right, why don't we go on and do this? So again, you have 3 pairs here. Then, and then. So I would like to hear those phrased as components of a single phrase. So 2 per phrase. Yum, ti-dum, ti-yum, 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 ti-yum. And again, he changes it suddenly after the 3rd one. Yes, exactly. Yeah, that's coming together very nicely. I think we're finally grasping like the interpretative aspect of the trinities of these motivic statements. Let's keep going, and we'll go to the largo. Can we do the recitative that comes after the 2nd ending? Just start again where you did and keep going.
Or this one.
Yeah, actually, I would like to hear the section before that, you know, where we stop. Hey, what do you think is the melody here? Good job. Sometimes I hear this played as the melody, and I actually agree. I think it's the 8th notes. Otherwise, it's the texture gets lost, and the vivacity and the agitation gets lost. Okay, let's do it. Let's do it and keep going. So just a little point here about the A's. How significant is it that he gave us the 4th A this time?
Very.
Right. So we don't want to, right? We want, look, it's just A's, right? What's the big deal? Just 1 A in right hand and octave A's in left hand, and anyone can do it, right? Well, it's what you put into it, right, that makes it special. 3 A's can sound like the most important music in the world, or it can just sound like 3 repeated A's. Depends how you approach it. So with this notion, then let's play that again, and more quietly, if you will, this whole thing. And then right? It's kind of the same idea. Fabulous. I have one question for you. Firstly, I would do the rest. I would make sure I lift the pedal here in the wrong register, but that's because of where I'm sitting. But here, make sure that's short. That's short, and then we go on to this. Now, Karen, if you were a conductor, who would you be conducting? Who would be playing these A's? Pom, 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 pom.
Maybe a like percussion, like the metal timpani thing, or you know.
Oh, definitely, they would definitely be there supporting that with a, but probably more than just percussion, don't you think?
Yeah.
Yeah, probably, you know, to make that crescendo, ti-ta, ti-ta, right? The whole orchestra on that last A, or at least half of it. Ti-ta, ti-ta. Notice I'm taking a little bit of time before the sforzando, right? So again, the agogic part that plays into that. Ti-ta, tam, ti. And everything fades. And the pianissimo harp, right? The G needs to be much softer. So it's T, ta, ta, chi. Like imagine yourself standing on stage going, give me the A, T, and then you do this to prepare for the G, right? It's a big physical gesture. On the piano, we don't have to do it, but we should feel it. One more time. I think it's good, but it needs even more space for that to happen. I think it's maybe a little bit happening too fast. You can do a little time. Take a little time into Largo. Exactly. Much better. I like that. I like that a lot. And listen, I know we didn't get through the rest of the movement, but I think the things that we talked about can be applied to the development section, which is where we just stopped, right? With the three recitatives, the announcements of those three notes. And then the subito allegro with the triplets with the first theme and the bass. Again, it's very similar things, you know, with leaning onto B sharp and then the first theme and so on and so forth. It just keeps going that way. This right here, I think that's another significant arrival moment where we have this. It needs to be much bigger than can be expressed on the piano. You just think more orchestrally through that whole thing. Your recitative was beautiful. All of this. Very beautiful. And I love that you held pedal through. That's for the audience's benefit. It is intended as such. Beethoven wrote one of the rare occasions in his earlier pieces, even middle pieces, where he actually wrote specifically to hold a pedal through all the tones, even if they sound dissonant, to create kind of a blur and a blend of sounds. So you did that really beautifully. Again, when you get back to the Allegro, we have three statements. So the three times, again, think about how you can bring that third one about so that it sounds prominent, right? To draw attention to the third one. And then the structure repeats three times. Then three times every time, and then that same exact things. It's very much the repetition of the exposition. So thus you can apply the same kind of interpretative ideas and thinking that we discussed for the exposition. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. And notice how at the very end, just one more thing, where he does the three Ds. He doesn't do a sforzando this time, right? He doesn't give us ta. He gives us totally different feelings. So I think that's worth noting. One more thing. There's so much to say always, and I've definitely exhausted the hour by talking a lot. At the very end, I like to go on attacca to the second movement because he brings back in that first measure of the second movement. It's the same idea as the beginning of the first. So right here, you just a Neapolitan to a sense. Does that make sense? Which one more piece of thinking here? The relationship, the significance of the pitch of B flat in this piece, something to think about. Well, it's there a lot, which I find very interesting because the idea of tonality based on pitch emphasis is something that didn't really manifest or materialize in compositional canon until quite a bit later than Beethoven wrote. Just some interesting thoughts to ponder. Thank you very much for playing for me today. I hope this was manageable on Zoom.
Thank you so much, both of you. Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Professor Subotic, for your compelling and illuminating commentary and input on all of this. This has really been great. So we had planned a live performance as well for Sabina playing the Beethoven's 32 Variations in C minor Ona Opus, but in our COVID world, scheduling can often be a quandary, and she is in a location without a piano right now.
I'm sorry about that.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely fine. It's so much of this is beyond our control, of course. But she intrepidly recorded the piece instead, and so we're going to watch that recording. I'm going to share my screen, and then Professor Subotic will be able to comment from that performance. So bear with me for a moment, and I will get it started.
Abba.
Thank you.
So tell me a little bit about what you love about this piece, because I love this piece too. You know, variation form is something that Beethoven was towards the end of his life. Well, of course, he wasn't intending it to be the end of his life, but it was a period in his life when he was really coming back to the variation form. The last movement of his very last piano sonata is a huge set of variations, Opus 111. And then, of course, the Diabelli variations, which is an enormous cycle of variations. This is like the miniature version of his, his later excursions into the form. So tell me about what you love about it.
So I don't love all the variations, but and those are probably just because of technical things like the repeated notes or, but I think quite a few of them are really, really beautiful. For me, specifically, I like the end ones and then the slower, but that's just because I play a lot of romantic music and I lean towards that style. But I do like, in general, variation type works because you get to explore the different elements and transition, and it's kind of just like a mini set, like of 32 different pieces. To me, they're wildly different. So
Character variations, right? Each one has it's like a miniature portrait of a personality, if you will, right?
yeah.
And I think that's very true for this set of variation. Each one comes, which is fascinating because they're all in C minor, respectively, you know, with some being in C major, but the parallel key, but they're all in the same key. They have the same structure, you know, the same bass line, the harmonic progressions. I mean, he even goes as far to, in most of them, I would say there's only a handful of exceptions where he alters the dynamic construction. You know, he writes them in a crescendo, so to speak, towards the sixth measure. And then the last two measures, 7 and 8, are suddenly almost an abrupt drop to the piano. So he maintains this structure for, I think, until right before the first major variation is where he changes that structure, the dynamic structure, and he stays loud with that scale that cascades down. That's variation number 11. And there's a diminuendo de marque, but and then he kind of comes into this new, right? So I'm glad that you brought up how you don't love all of the variations for the reasons of technical challenges, because that points us in the direction of talking about what is the purpose of this piece. What did he write it for? As I mentioned before when I was speaking about the Tempest, Beethoven was a consummate business person. He presented himself with intent to impress. And the man was always impressive. There's never a time that Beethoven inner genius and inspiration and amazing talent, but also he was quite keen on impressing, and like that, this piece, I think, was written with intent to dazzle the audience with his technical acumen, which makes them difficult to play because hey, you've got to do as well as Beethoven wants you to do, right? He immediately launches you into that challenge with the first variation. So I do want to talk about maybe a little bit about each variation. I hope I can manage. If I spend a minute on each variation, I might be able to get through all of them. I'll do my best. So in the very beginning, I really liked the character of the theme. I thought it was excellent. One thing that I would emphasize is that contrast that I talked about, the dynamic difference between the first 6 measures, where he builds that. This German augmented 6 chord is something that Beethoven used quite a lot in his output. So this chord is almost like a flashing red light, like signal, 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 something's going to happen, watch out for it. So be more dramatic with that change right there, where he climbs to that subdominant and then drops. Just drops you from the heights, right? You have achieved the height, and then he just kind of goes, okay, no, we're going to try it again in a different way. And so then he goes on and he gives you 32 different ways in which he explores this idea, which is amazing. The other thing that I think you did very well in the theme, but I'd like to see the integrity of that stay a little bit more through the entire set of variation, is this pickup. Sorry. I think that's really important. It's, everything comes from somewhere else. In Beethoven's case, a lot of his ideas are based in the Baroque ideas. And so this is no exception, this bass line. It's kind of an embellished chaconne or passacaglia, really. And the fact that he emphasizes the second beat can also be tied to a saraband, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, right? Does it make sense?
Yeah, I know it does.
So there's sort of a processional quality to this theme. So as we go on to the first variation, I sympathize with what you said about the repeated notes. It's tricky. Now, what makes it tricky is variations in hand position. So as you were playing, I was noticing that your hand position was kind of shifting a little more than it should when you're changing fingers, and that's what makes it challenging to get it right coming out. It's almost not so hard to repeat them. Your repetitions were great, but because of the shift in the hand position when you were coming down and going up with your arpeggios, that was a little bit tricky to get correct. Am I making sense there? So when you're going, I don't have the greatest setup here. I was trying to find a way where you can see me, and so when you do this right here, you have to prepare your hand here instead of starting here and then hoping to get the notes of the G major arpeggios by magical, aiming. Does that make sense? So just prepare. So you're not stretching towards the notes as you're playing. And same on the way up. Prepare. You see what I'm doing? Can you tell?
Yeah.
Okay. And then hard to do it when I'm looking at you and not looking at my hand. I can't even see my hand. The lighting is blinding. So okay.
So prepare before the arpeggios.
You have to set your hand, otherwise it's not impossible to get them right, but it's much harder. It's much harder if you don't have your hand set up, because it goes by so fast.
Yeah.
So that's the thing about this repeated variation. The other thing that I would caution you about is your use of pedal. When you talk about being a romantic at heart, I think for a lot of people that connects with the acoustic experience of resonance and overtones and the richness of the harmonic material. And, we just love our pedal and our, beautiful chordal, dark. We don't really love this. That's just not that great.
It's just different, yeah.
But that's one of the characteristics of classical styles. So we don't pedal through rests in classical style typically. So you see the rests in the left hand, they are important. And I don't think that this variation was really intended to be pedaled at all. That's not to say that one shouldn't use pedal. I'm just saying that when you're choosing how to use pedal, you need to consider the original intent, the original aesthetic of sound, if you will. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I don't remember using pedal in these, but it's possible.
Not in this one, but just generally, I feel.
Okay, here.
Well, you may not have. That's absolutely true. So just making sure that that you're just aware of that as a general characteristic of classical style. And you're absolutely right. You may not have used pedal here at all. So it's the same thing with the left hand in the second variation where you have to prepare when you come down. That almost necessitates like a little moment of reset right here, as opposed to just going directly into the downbeat. And then, does that make sense? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the repeated notes. And then the same thing with
To the third.
now I think you remind me, did you use pedal on the first measure? Which I think is fine.
Yeah, on the third variation I did.
Yeah. So I think that's totally fine. I would not, and I liked your idea of using the pedal on the arpeggiation coming down, but not on the repeated notes. So to maintain that integrity between variation 1, 2, and 3, so that we hear that what he's doing is actually varying the material by means of using the repetitive. Apparently Chopin wrote somewhere that the hardest thing to do on the piano is to play repeated notes.
It's my least favorite thing.
I don't think you're alone in that, and so much of that has to do, excuse me, with the mechanism, the piano repetition mechanism. So it's not just the physiology of the pianist, but also the physics and mechanics of the piano. But
Yeah.
your repeated notes were really excellent. Okay, so proceeding to this one here, variation 4. I would have liked to hear just a little bit more of these. The outer, the bottom and the top of the left and right hand, and keeping these a little bit quieter. This is almost like violinistic, like Paganini-esque trick, where you hits with your left hand.
Yeah.
So it's kind of an interesting texture. And I think if you don't emphasize the tops and the bottoms, you don't get that contrast. It's not clear to people that that's what's happening. It's like your hand has to do 2 things at the same time. Your bottom finger pluck the keys, and your top finger plucks the key as well.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Don't forget, in Beethoven's time, when he played concerts, people were seated right next to him. It wasn't like today. We have big concert halls where people can't really see your hands unless they're being televised. But he was used to people watching him do these amazing things. So using octaves and repeated notes, there was also visual. There was a visual part to that was exciting to see. Okay, going on to variation 5, which I thought was really, really beautiful. I think what he plays with here, and certainly this is a place where I would use pedal. Why not, right? It's I think very appropriate. There is a sustained harmony in the left hand. I think what he plays with here is not only the displacement of the melody because of this, and the contrast. He also plays with the contrast between the staccato and legato. When you are applying pedal to this, think about how you can do it so that it doesn't obscure that contrast. So maybe it would be more appropriate to apply pedal to the second and third beat and not at the beginning, even though that makes it harder. Do this without pedal, right? So. Right? But it's more beautiful if we hear that and then rather than if you pedal at the beginning, and that contrast is kind of lost.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. And then in the next one, I agree with pedaling. Why? Because the purpose of the damper pedal during the classical period, when it was certainly available, it wasn't as sophisticated or used as frequently, but it was available. The purpose was to blur or to emphasize the sound. it was not used as much to connect leaps as it was in the 19th century when the piano kind of grew to its almost final model, more sophisticated model. But it was mostly used for these two purposes: to increase the volume of sound or to actually purposely blur the tones, kind of like in Clarence's Tempest Sonata, where he wrote, to blur all those notes together, even though they're actually not part of the same harmony. So in this particular case, pedal is appropriate for this for the fortissimo. And then you didn't use the pedal for the rest, which was great. I often think that there isn't enough emphasis in piano playing on the fact that not all notes need to be even or equal. We're trained to play evenly and equally, but then you get to a piece like this, and he wrote Sforzandi, right? So here's another example of where your hands have to do two different things. The fingers which accentuate the sforzandi have to behave differently than fingers which have the other notes. And even though he wrote fortissimo, what he really means is the impression of a fortissimo. It doesn't mean that every note needs to be fortissimo and then some, right? So it's loud, it's forceful, but the sforzandi is really what's standing out in this variation. They have a particular emphasis, and that emphasis can be produced by either playing them louder or a little bit longer. So instead of playing them super short, you can play them a little bit, just a little bit longer, and that gives it maybe a variation on the idea of sforzando that is a little bit less hard on the ears.
Yeah.
A little bit easier to shape dynamically. Towards the sixth measure, I think you get a little bit tangled in your fingerings. Fingerings are the pain of every pianist's life. We've only got 10 of them, and we have so many notes to play. And when I was a very young pianist, I hated working on fingerings. I have to say, I just thought, why, I can just make it up as I go. And now when I think about it, I just like my hair stands at its end, Anytime, I guarantee 9 out of 10 times if someone makes a mistake, it's because of the fingering.
Yeah.
That's the culprit. Most common culprit of making a mistake when playing, when performing, is the fingering. Even when you think you're having a memory slip, it's usually the fingering that messed you up. Like if you rewind and if you could record yourself, that's the thing. So I think it's well worth spending a little bit of time on this measure and really understanding the concept behind the fingering. I don't know what it is in your score, but I'm looking at a Moshkovsky edition here that I was able to dig up on IMSLP, and he organizes the right hand fingering by putting the thumb on the bottom white note and second finger on the black key, which is pretty standard for kind of broken pattern. So I would just look at that, and instead of just practicing the fingering, try to understand why it's written the way it is. Why isn't it something else? I think that goes a long way in integrating it into one's mind when one understands why, in addition to how.
Yeah.
And then variation 7, the Più Tranquillo, I thought was also very beautiful, and I can totally see the use of pedal in this, right? Because it's legato, it's flowing, it's one harmony per measure. I think that's justifiable. However, it doesn't mean that one shouldn't pay attention to the fact that the octaves in the right hand are intended to be connected by fingerings. And I don't have a particularly large hand, so for me, it's difficult to use fingerings like 5, 4, 3 in a row very often. For octaves, but sometimes I can. Depends on the topography of the piano. Have you experimented with the fingering?
I can only reach like an octave. I have pretty small hands, so I can't do the 3 and the 1.
Right. So in this particular case, we're kind of stuck with the 5-1-4-1 changes. So occasionally you can substitute you can shift, like if you're going up to You can't see my hand, of course. Let's see. 5, 4, 5, 4, 5, 4. I would practice those finger substitutions or backwards, you know, doing that. Have you ever heard of Theodore Kullak? Kullak.
I don't believe so, no.
He was a 19th century pedagogue. I believe he studied with Liszt. It was one of Liszt's pupils. He's not very remembered or famous really for much, but he did write an excellent instructional book on how to play octaves. So, you know, if you
That sounds fun.
right. No, not fun. But if you ever want to geek out and practice, you know, different techniques for octaves, I highly recommend diving into that. It's like an encyclopedic approach to how to play octaves. So that's right here in this volume of this variation number 7. That's an example of where something like that would be really useful, the principle of changing fingers on one note. Again, as far as the dynamic structures, again, I would just make sure that you're really building towards the 6th measure and then dropping down to a piano. The wonderful thing about this piece is that it kind of plays itself. If you can play it and you just do what's written, it's good. You know, you just follow Beethoven's instructions. Variation 7 is, of course, a variant on variation 6, and you don't have to worry about the legato right hand here, but there is that challenge of contracting and expanding hand. Right? You're going from a small stretch to a bigger one and shifting. That's another octave technique issue where being able to bend the palm and the fingers. I don't know if you can see, I'm on the wrong side here. So if I'm going this way, you see how my 3rd finger kind of bends in order to bring.
Yeah, sort of.
Kind of, sort of, yeah. So the malleability and flexibility in the hand there is very important. It's much harder to do it like this. And it's possible, but he wrote it piano and legato. So it points to the technique of having a flexible wrist and palm and just being able to replace the fingers. Kind of like when you were a kid and you were learning inversions, and I don't know if you remember, like, you know, your teacher probably told you replace the 2 notes, and then you play your fingers. You know, so you're always shifting by. Can you see what I'm doing?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm asking you because I can't, because I'm
okay.
so you have to confirm for me that it's actually visible. Okay, and then this variation number 9, espressivo moderato, was very beautiful. And again, what the challenge is here is 2 against 3, right? And doing that kind of a murmury interlacing of the duplet and the triplet without interrupting either the triplet flow or the duplet flow. It's an exercise on a trill, variation of a trill idea, and he uses this kind of a trill in many other variations that he wrote later. Again, you know, I would mention Opus 109 and 111, you know, these two of the late sonatas where he does this. So it's almost like this is can be even seen as kind of a preparatory exercises for his later works or for his bigger works. Kind of like if you look at Brahms's music and you go through his 51 exercises, which he kindly left for us to study, to understand his technique, you kind of go, okay, well, you know, he wrote basically a manual for his technique by leaving us the 51 exercises. Once you go through the 51 exercises, you understand Brahms's technique. So the best way to learn how to play Beethoven is to play a lot of it to get a sense of what it is. So here's an example of that written out trill with a melody on top. I thought you did it very, very beautifully. I would, again, I don't remember, and I'm not confirming or denying that you used pedal in this one, but
I believe I did.
Again, I would be careful maybe not to cover up that interlacing of the duplet and the triplet, that fine texture. Part of the problem with pedal in Baroque and classical period is not that it's not beautiful or that it doesn't sound good, it's that it obliterates the delicacy of the textures. The textures are delicate, and then when you put pedal on top, it's like you're just putting butter over everything. It just it's rich and tasty, but you can't really, well, French would probably disagree because butter makes,
Yeah, exactly.
but maybe ketchup. I don't know. Maybe ketchup is a better condiment
Yeah.
to use for this particular analogy. Making sense so far?
Yeah.
Okay. And then you can see at the very end of this variation, he actually writes the TR, TR, TR at the end, right? The
The
trill.
trills, yeah.
So he's kind of saying, well, yeah, just continue.
Yeah.
And then in variation number 10, again, we have the emphasis in the second beats, the sforzando. I'll beat down here. He uses this in the Waldstein Sonata in the middle of the first movement when he brings the exposition back. He uses this exact pattern. So kind of interesting to see that he did himself, right, or that he borrowed from his own repertory of patterns. Again, you have to be careful with pedal because if you use too much pedal, you obliterate all the fine finger work. It just starts to sound like thunder maybe, or a rumble, which is the purpose of this pattern. But the purpose is also to be able to tell that it's fast notes rather than a sound effect. So with Beethoven, we want to stay away from sound effects. We want to still be able to tell the texture. He rarely indulges in sound effects. And this is a preparation, this is where he changes that dynamic structure. He goes from he abandons the last two measures being a sudden drop in sound. You can see that in this variation. With this being in the left hand, and your camera was on the right side, so I wasn't able to see left hand, but just for the purpose of technical instruction or maybe advice, just make sure that your elbow and your wrist are aligned so that you can actually articulate with the fifth and the fourth finger. Sometimes I find that people drop their hand a little bit too far to the left and angle it too far to the side, and then they get fatigued because they don't have enough, they can't do this.
Yeah.
And which you really need to be able to do in order to utilize the fifth and fourth finger with strength and accuracy.
Okay.
Just making sure that you're supporting the fifth and fourth finger with the entire, I call this the flipper side, right? And then he reverses the pattern and the melody in variation 11, which in that crazy scale leads us to this beautiful count variation, which I could tell you really liked because you played it with a lot of feeling. Again, here I would actually maybe use a little bit slower tempo to give it more of a calm feeling and more processional and kind of, it's almost reverent.
Yeah.
Overall writing. Just very, well, he says calm, very calm and processional, reverent, and quiet. And I would stay away from making it heave in any way, making any kind of swells in the phrase, because that actually is contrary to the character. One of the general things maybe to remember from that is that often we don't stay within the character for long enough. We don't stay within the dynamic range for long enough. It'll say piano and we start piano, but then already by the second or third measure, we've gotten louder. Or it'll say, forte or fortissimo, and we're like, yeah, we played the chord forte and fortissimo, and then we totally drop way before we should. So just really defining the lengths of your dynamic range. How long is it? Is it 4 measures? Is it 2 measures? Is it just 3 notes? Just really knowing where the dynamics change. So in this particular case, it doesn't really change until the second half of the variation, I would say. So even though the sequence invites you to make a crescendo, hold steady because you want it to be tranquil and calm.
Okay.
In variation 13, the sort of the noodly right and this reminds me a little bit of its improvisatory sounding, don't you think? It kind of meanders a little bit back and forth. He explores different contexts for the harmonization of the passacaglia/chaconne bass. But it's almost Bach-like. It has similarities to a Bach invention or a prelude. There's a certain sense of purity in it that I think comports well with the variation right before it, which is also very pure sounding. The C major all of a sudden is like tabula rasa. Everything is just wiped. All your pianistic sins are wiped away and you get to start fresh with C major, and we introduce the whole concept here. Etc. And same with variation 14. It's slightly more allegretto, maybe in a sense. It's more lively, but I would keep the right hand quiet and just elegant. Another characteristic of classical style is that once a texture begins, it doesn't really change until it's that's not a very smart way of saying it. It doesn't change until it changes. The texture doesn't change until it doesn't change in the way it's played until the texture changes. So it stays the same. The staccato stays all the same all the way through until the next variation where the texture is changed. So, what I was hearing a little bit and how you were playing is that your stroke, so this is a technical comment, that your stroke was changing a little bit depending on the topography of the keyboard, and you want to be just consistent. It's just like the preparing. You want to really think ahead how you have to shift and adjust your arm to the topography of the piano so that your stroke can remain the same throughout all the staccato thirds in the right hand.
Okay.
And of course, pedal is the enemy here because it will change the length of the stroke. Variation 15 I thought was quite beautiful. I think in this you can maybe take a little bit of time going into the 7th measure, expanding the timing with the range. Right here. It's kind of operatic at that moment. It's certainly, like I said, these are all different characters. And this one just sounds operatic because all of the suspensions, very vocal, all of this. I mean, talk about romantic bend, right? It sounds very romantic. Yeah. And then he says con leggerezza with the next variation, number 16. Do you know what that means?
I mean, I don't know the direct translation, but
but I was just wondering if you were familiar with the word. So leggero means lightly, but in a pianistic, it's a pianistic euphemism or compositional euphemism that implies a more detached touch. So not quite staccato, but kind of pochissimo staccato. So the idea of lightness is achieved by means of making the notes a little bit shorter, if that makes sense. So right? Instead of So that's important there. And again, you have to negotiate the use of pedal with that effect in the right hand. If you use pedal, I think it's still possible to make it leggerissimo con leggerezza, but again, it's the delicacy of texture and articulation that can get drowned or too smoothed out. It becomes too much of the same when pedal is used without awareness of the character of the articulation. Variation 17, I thought was quite beautiful, and I can totally understand why one would use pedal here. You know, it's a counterpoint imitation in the right hand with kind of a tremolo, slow tremolo accompaniment in the left hand. And the idea behind this variation is the sustaining of sound and suspensions and different ways of using appoggiaturas. So I think it's justifiable to use pedal here and to sustain those tones. The variations where that is not the intent, right? So I thought that was very successful here. I would just, at the end, the last two measures, I don't know if you've noticed, but the theme from the beginning, this right here, that comes back in the last two measures in the left hand. So I would pay more attention to that than to the right hand, which is just tremolandoing there. And he reverses the importance. The left hand carries the melody in the last two measures versus the first six where the right hand carries the melody.
Okay.
Also, just a small thing in the second measure, I think you played a D twice on top.
Yeah, sorry.
Just, you know, housekeeping kind of things. In variation 18, again, my comment is going to have to do with pedal. I thought technically, it was actually really quite good and very clear and impressive. I wouldn't pedal the first two 16th notes.
Okay.
After that, okay, but these. I would
Okay.
have those very strongly without pedal to give that deliberate fire, you know, that Beethoven is so known for. It's a very fiery variation. And if you pedal it, it sounds
takes away from that.
moody. You know, it doesn't sound quite as deliberate. It just sounds moody. And I think while Beethoven may have been moody, and we know that he was also a powerful intellect and actually, you know, in some ways, a very disciplined person. I mean, see how much music he produced in his short time. He really dedicated himself that way. Okay. The next variation I thought was quite nice. This is a variation where the pedal actually doesn't reduce the clarity because it's arpeggiated harmonies. So I think it works for this particular one as long as you lift it on the rest, on the eighth note rest that is indicated in the left hand, and as long as you maybe choose when to use it, maybe use it when it's forte but not when it's piano, so that you can have that contrast excuse me, in dynamics. In variation 20, the accompaniment is in the right hand, but the melody, such as it is in the interest is in the left hand figuration. And I know it's just so much more comfortable when one pedals that, but maybe just be sure to change it more frequently. And again, remember what I said about lining up your arms so that it doesn't sink on the left side, so that you can have more support sideways with your fourth and fifth finger. I thought the next variation worked very well. The octave variation, again, you know, maybe the point is in the punctuation and the shortness of the octaves. So again, be careful with not pedaling for those articulations. Variation 23 is sort of mysterious and mystical in a way, right? And it's all about the blend of the notes. and the slight undulation of the chords. So that's a place, he writes pianissimo. I would definitely explore using the soft pedal on this.
Oh,
Uh,
okay.
pedal, soft pedal has been vilified a little too much, I think. Pianos of the 19th century, certainly in Beethoven's time, pianos had as many as 4 soft pedals. I mean, that was a thing for composers at the time. Pedals were like neat tricks that a pianist could use. And so certainly using a soft pedal in Beethoven's music is absolutely necessary and appropriate. So whenever he writes sottovoce or pianissimo, I would feel absolutely justified in doing something like that. For example, in Variation 24, I mean, why not try playing that with a soft pedal down, with the mute? It's a very different sound than playing it without the soft pedal. And I think that was kind of the intent to diversify the pianistic sound.
Okay.
I would never walk there by myself. Yeah.
I would talk more and more and more, but I see that we're running out of time and I exceeded my limit of 1 minute per variation. But just to say, to continually pay attention to the use of pedal versus not using the pedal, and just exploring some of the, in more difficult passages, being courageous and brave and just really tackling it as without fear. See what that can do for you. If you're not afraid of a passage or a technical challenge, you will learn how to do it just by like launching into it and making yourself do it. Sometimes solutions come after making lots of mistakes. As a matter of fact, most of the time solutions come after doing it all kinds of wrong ways, and then you extract the best way out of that, what works and what doesn't work. Before I finish this, I just want to point out in variation 30, again, I would use soft pedal, and I don't think the intent was this. I think it's more. It's more suspenseful. If you make them short, then it's not suspenseful enough.
Okay.
Is not brought out, and that suspense carries on into the 31st variation, which kind of starts out of this murky left end. So using pedal there, sounds okay because it's supposed to be murky. So always think about what is the character of the variation, and so never use pedal just because it makes you more comfortable.
Okay.
Service music. Well, thank you very much for letting me comment on your Beethoven. It was a pleasure to hear you and Karen play, and
No, thank you.
it's been just so much fun for me.
Thank you so much, Professor Subotic. Thank you, Sabina. Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Professor Subotic, for sharing your wonderful insights and compelling wisdom and illumination on all of these pieces. It's particularly compelling because not only are you brilliant, but you've played all these pieces, and not everyone has done the whole cycle, and even fewer have done the whole cycle and all the duos and all the trios. So that's really quite tremendous, and this has been just a great pleasure to have you here, so to speak, virtually across a couple of time zones, and I'm so glad we could make it work out and you could join us and share all of this with us. So thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
So thank you all for joining us as well who are watching on YouTube Live. Just a reminder that at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we will have our Music Department Beethoven at 250 Festival, and a few of us will be playing live. Karen, once again, will be offering the first movement of the Tempest. I'll be playing the Opus 77 Fantasia, and then after that there will be several video premieres of from students who recorded and submitted videos this week that have never been seen. So please join us for that. The YouTube link is on the Hunter College, or rather the YouTube live link is on the Hunter College Music Department YouTube channel. So I hope to see you all there. We'll sign off now for YouTube Live.